Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are joining us from today. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending this Global Investigative Journalism Network webinar on investigating organized crime in the Golden Triangle. My name is Eunice Au, and I am GIJN's Global Team Manager. As an introduction, the Golden Triangle, where the borders of Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos intersect, is one of the world's renowned centers of criminal activity. The region's underworld economy turns over billions of dollars annually in narcotics production, human trafficking, wildlife smuggling, illegal mining, and more. As we will hear today, these activities reach far beyond the Golden Triangle itself, and its cross-border illicit networks have global impact, involving criminal groups across Asia and around the world. For decades, the Golden Triangle has been a source of fascination to journalists worldwide. They focus on the seemingly endless stories of criminal rackets, larger-than-life characters, and the area's rich history and cultures. Covering organized crime, however, is very challenging, and facts about the region's black markets and its criminal players and their political backers can be hard to come by. So in this GIJN webinar, we are pleased to have 3 senior journalists who will share all their tips and resources to report from this region. Without further delay, I'd now like to introduce today's speakers. Thu Bui is a Bangkok-based journalist covering international politics for BBC News Vietnamese. She has conducted numerous investigations into human trafficking in the region, including trafficking into Cambodia by gangs with connections in northeastern Myanmar. She also runs media literacy projects for young Vietnamese, contributing to handbooks and other works on media literacy and to codes of ethics for journalists. Bertil Lintner is a Thailand-based journalist and author of 22 books on politics, conflict, crime, and geostrategic issues in Asia. He was a correspondent for the now-defunct weekly Far Eastern Economic Review for over 2 decades and now writes for Asia Times. His most recent books are about the Wa, a people in northeastern Myanmar, power games in the Indian Ocean, and a biography of the Dalai Lama. He covered crime in the Asia-Pacific region in his 2003 book, Blood Brothers, The Criminal Underworld in Asia. And finally, we have Nguyen Nguyen Pay, an activist, researcher, and journalist in Myanmar. For her extensive in-depth reporting on the Myanmar border and related issues, she received the Best Geopolitics Feature Award from the Yangon Journalism School in 2021. As a political journalist for over a decade, she has focused on such issues as civil war, transnational conflicts, minorities, diversity, equality, federalism, and democratization. So just a little bit about GIJN, the Global Investigative Journalism Network. It is the largest global network of nonprofit investigative journalism organizations. We currently have 235 member organizations in 89 countries. However, we work with journalists everywhere, in nonprofits, in commercial organizations, and with freelancers. We have an extensive range of resources and tip sheets to help journalists worldwide, which you can check out on gijn.org. And today we also want to hear from you in the audience. Please send written questions and messages in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the webinar. You can start asking your questions from now. I must also mention that this webinar is tied to the publication of GIJN's Guide to Investigating Organized Crime in the Golden Triangle, which was released earlier this week. And this guide is written by one of our speakers today, Bertil, and you can find the link which my colleague will pop in the chat. So let's not delay any further. Let's start with Bertil.
Okay, thank you so much. But since we're going to talk about crime in the Golden Triangle, it might be a good idea to start by defining what the Golden Triangle is and where it is. So we can have a look at this map. The Golden Triangle is not what many people believe an old name. It's actually very new. It was coined as recently and more or less by chance in 1971 by a US government official called Marshall Green. Until then, the US government had actually claimed that opium and heroin, the use of which at that time in the 70s was becoming widespread among American soldiers in Vietnam. They claimed that the narcotics were produced and smuggled out of China. But then when the United States wanted to normalize relations with China, they actually admitted that this had been pure propaganda. Marshall Green then said, that the drugs were actually produced in a golden triangle stretching from northeastern Burma to northern Thailand and northwestern Laos. It is not clear why he used that term, but the name caught on because it captured the imagination of the public and evoked images of a wide and virtually lawless area. And this is exactly what it has been for decades. The most lawless part of the Golden Triangle is in northeastern Burma or northeastern Myanmar, where a civil war has been raging for decades. Drugs have been produced and all kinds of local armies are active. Some are political, others much less so. Writing about this is a challenge, and because it means dealing with a lot of very dodgy characters. That is why we compiled this guide, which you can find online. But as you can see on the map, the Golden Triangle has no borders and neither has organized crime. And although most criminal activity is not centered in the Myanmar sector of the Golden Triangle, the gangs have connections and contacts in Thailand and Laos, as well as in Cambodia, Vietnam, and China. And we talk about wildlife smuggling, which has become a very lucrative business. The connections stretching as far as Africa. You must therefore look at the whole picture, not only the area marked on this map. But if you're going to write about organized crime, it's also important to understand how organized crime works. In this case, we're talking about Chinese organized crime, but a word of warning here. When we're talking about ethnic organized crime, don't denigrate an entire people, an entire community, because there are criminals among them. That is very important, and all journalists should remember that. You may have heard about the so-called triads, and it's easy to get the impression that they're a cross between the Freemasons and the IBM, huge international conglomerate shrouded in Masonic rituals. Actually, there's more Hollywood than reality. The gangs may have regional and even global connections, but even so, they're actually quite localized. And the triads may be living outside the law, and they have their rituals, but they're not outside societies. They're part of societies. And this is basically how it works. And it's important to keep this in mind in order to stay safe and avoid lawsuits for libel and defamation. Take the next slide now. Yes. I'll give you one example from Hong Kong, because it is easier, it is not so difficult to explain, not too complicated. You have three boxes here. The first is governments, big business, and intelligence agencies. And they overlap in this corner with triads and organized crime, which in turn overlaps with street gangs and foot soldiers. Some years ago, some Hong Kong developers wanted to build a new resort outside Hong Kong. And they bought up a lot of land. But there was one old man living there, with his family, been living for generations. He didn't want to sell. I said, no, I'm staying here. This is my house. Get away. But of course, but there was no way they could get rid of him by legal means. So what did they do? Well, not all big businessmen are members of the triads. Very few are, but some are here. And they have then connections with organized crime. So they will go from here to this little box here and ask the triads, can you sort this out for us? We have a troublemaker here. Please do something. And they say, sure, we do that for a fee. But they may not even do it themselves because they will be too exposed. So then you have the street gangs and the foot soldiers. Most of them are not members of any triad, but some of them are. They overlap here. So this guy's in the middle box will tell people in the bottom box here that, go and do something to get rid of this guy. So they did. The first thing they did was to send a hearse that was parked outside his house, and there was a lot of intimidation, and eventually he gave in. But the point here is that you can never trace this back to the first box. It's too compartmentalized. And very often, the street gangs and the foot soldiers, they don't even know who gave the order and who told them to perform a certain activity. Well, in the Golden Triangle, it is more or less the same. The gangs are not necessarily triads, but they function in similar ways. They have similar relationships with local and international authorities. And it goes way beyond corruption. We can close that slide. Yeah, we can close the slide. But the gangs often serve as useful assets for intelligence agencies. And they do things, again, which the authorities cannot do themselves. And in return, a blind eye is turned to the other officially illegal activities. And you will find a lot of examples of that in the guide, which is, just been published. And if we talk about the Golden Triangle, in the beginning, it was mostly opium and heroin, narcotics. Now, opium is made from, heroin is made from opium. You refine 10 kilograms of opium into 1 kilogram of heroin. And there was a very lucrative business. And many of the gangs that were involved in that had high-level connections everywhere, and therefore they were tolerated. And nothing was done about it, even if anyone would want to do that. But today, things have changed quite a lot. Opium and heroin are not that popular anymore as far as the drugs are concerned. There are now other drugs being produced in this area, and that is mostly synthetic drugs like methamphetamines. But in addition to that, the same gangs who are involved in drug production and drug smuggling, they are also involved in the illegal trade in wildlife. And in minerals. The most recent addition to that is rare earth minerals from Burma, which are smuggled into China and then used in the electronics industry. That's a multi-billion-dollar business. And very little has actually been written about it. I think the NEP has actually done that. Just one of the few was investigated that particular side of business in the Golden Triangle. There's also human smuggling, and the connections go as far as North Korea, because a lot of North Korean refugees came this way through North Korea, through China, down to the Golden Triangle, to Thailand, and where they were eventually picked up by the South Korean authorities and given a new life in South Korea. But remember that there was no way they could have traveled through China without the help of organized gangs, crime gangs. And they're, of course, not interested in politics, but they did this for a fee, and maybe also because they needed some other favors from whoever they were doing this for. So, and another big business which has become very lucrative in recent years is this casino business. And the casino business and other rackets in the Golden Triangle are not confined just to the Golden Triangle, because as I said, criminals have no borders. The crimes do not stop at a particular border. Cambodia has become a center for the casino business. And it's one of the main casino operators in Cambodia is a very famous gangster from Macau called Broken Tooth Koi. And he's actually, in most recent years, also opened a shop in the Myanmar sector of the Golden Triangle. So this crime networks, they overlap and they interact. And it is actually a challenge for you as journalists to investigate that. And again, I hope you will find some useful answers in the guide which you have just produced. So this is basically the overview. I mean, where the Golden Triangle is and how organized crime works. So now I think we should let our speakers tell us more in detail how it works in their specific areas of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Bertil. It's interesting. As you've mentioned, crime is borderless, and the criminals, they work across borders. Crime, the supply of illegal products and the proceeds of crime in the Golden Triangle intersects with so many other countries throughout Asia. So what can journalists do to investigate these criminal activities in their own countries?
Well, it depends what you're looking at. If you look at drugs or human trafficking or antiquities, when antiques from Burma are also being smuggled through the Golden Triangle to points beyond. But if you want to really investigate what's going on in the Golden Triangle, you actually have to come here. And you cannot really go to the Myanmar sector or the Burma or the Golden Triangle. It would be too risky, too dangerous. And for a foreigner, even a foreign journalist, it's impossible to get a visa from Myanmar these days, not since the coup in February last year. And then, of course, you have to depend a lot on local sources. You have to have trusted sources you can trust, and they have to trust you, but it's equally important. And don't forget that once you have left the area, those sources must remain safe and anonymous if they're this if it's so asked for, because they will be there forever. You will not. But I live in Chiang Mai, which is in northern Thailand, so it's slightly different. But nevertheless, it's very important to protect your local sources. And the best local sources are actually not the government officials or whatever. It's local journalists very often. It's NGO workers, people who work in communities. Talk to them and listen to them. That's the best way forward.
Thank you for that tip. You were showing us how these players involved in organized crime overlaps. The government's big business intelligence agencies overlap with triads and organized crime, which then intersect with the street gangs and foot soldiers. So where should journalists focus their investigations on to expose the system?
It depends what story you want to expose, because to expose the foot soldiers, that's very easy, because they are the ones who get caught, right? The triads, hardly ever. And the people in the first box, never. Almost never. I mean, very, very few cases of that, because you need some really strong conspiracy in laws in order to get somebody in that box to stand trial and answer for what he is responsible for. But again, it depends very much on the story you want to cover. If you want to cover the wildlife trade, for instance, then you would also have to look way beyond the Golden Triangle. As I said, a lot of it, rhino horns, not tigers, not tigers in South Africa, but it's rhino horns, and there are also other wildlife products, which are coming all the way from South Africa to this lawless part of the Golden Triangle in Myanmar, because there anything goes. There's no, it's not run by any central authority which could clamp down on it, even if they wanted to do that. And the other thing is all these people working in casinos. Many of them, as Tua will explain, have been kidnapped, more or less, or not actually kidnapped. They may promise very good jobs in Thailand, but then they're kidnapped and sent to casinos in Burma or in Cambodia. And I heard, and the thing there is that there's sort of online crime. And that goes also way beyond the Golden Triangle. I heard the other day that they started recruiting people from Kenya because they can speak English. And until now, there's been mostly Indians and Pakistanis, but they got there's been too much attention to that. And in Cambodia, it's of course mostly Vietnamese, English-speaking Vietnamese who have been hired to do this sort of things. So it is very difficult to say, give a general advice on how you should cover all these issues, because nobody can. You have to specialize in one issue, then look at the various steps there. And again, you can investigate who the gangs are and who is behind the gangs. But that is when you have to be very careful. You may even have to seek legal advice before you publish a story.
Thank you very much, Bertil. Let's move over to Tu Bui, our second speaker.
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tu Bui from the BBC Vietnamese, and I have been covering several Cambodia scam cases for BBC Vietnamese and BBC News this year. Thank you for having me here, and it's so excited to share with you my work. So victims who were lured to Cambodia and ended up being exploited at undercover labor compounds came to me from a group of Vietnamese community on Facebook. At that time, I read thousands of people struggle for help and they calling for help on Facebook. They posted photos of them beaten up and with scars and with bruises. So I was curious why this problem emerged at such grand scale, and at that time, and I decided to investigate to it. Next slide. But bear in mind that BBC Vietnamese, like us, are not allowed to operate in Vietnam. So it is impossible for me, myself, to meet those escaped victims face to face, and we had no access to police records or findings on this issue officially. We also have a challenge regarding the safety for victims. In many cases, it is not safe for them to speak to us when they were still stuck in those compounds in Cambodia, because they so afraid of retaliation on themselves or their family members. And at that time, due to limited freedom of threat in our country, Vietnam, victim blaming is so common. The mainstream narrative portrayed by police reports is those victims, like, you get trapped because you are greedy for easy job, easy money, and that's what you live for. So, and Vietnamese media, like I said, with the limited freedom of press, didn't mention a lot about the responsibility of the government, and they never like hold them accountable. So, and to make the picture grimmer, I look at the Vietnam's legal framework, and it is so poor. So the identifying those people as human trafficking victims is tricky business. According to Vietnam Penal Code, a person is not considered a victim if he or she voluntarily chose the trip, even though they are deceived in the first place. So for example, you can imagine that victims came back, they escaped successfully from Cambodia back to Vietnam, and the police work with them. And the very first question the police will ask, did you willing to or voluntarily go on that car to Cambodia? And the victim said yes, because they expected to have a job there in Cambodia, so they were not considered as human trafficking victims. And more irony, in many cases, escaped victims from the forced labor camps were charged with a fine for crossing the border illegally. So basically, they are really in vulnerable situation. Next slide, please. So after have that big picture in mind, with comprehensive research, I started interview as many victims as possible from 15 to 40 years old. I also interview victims' classmates, parents, rescuers, neighbors to make a clear picture and for cross-check purpose. For verifying, I talked to Vietnamese and Cambodian colleagues and other sources, like a group of YouTubers who went to Cambodia to rescue some victims, and they have videos and they have all the things, resources. And I also worked with white hackers to hack to some system of those casino companies. And when so it is hard for me to not talk to them face to face. So when I talk to victims, I ask many particular questions as possible. Like, I ask them again and again to describe clearly and in detail the way they were lured to Cambodia, and the facilities they stayed, people they have met, and tasks that they were forced to do, to make sure their answers were consistent. Next slide, please. So when I received those photos from a victim that he sent me, and then you can see that he has the location, the live location, and he had some photos when he was there with complex and high structures like that. I used Google Maps to locate exactly the compound that he mentioned. Next slide, please. So I know exactly the main gate that in the first picture you saw, and the security room, and the building that he stayed, to bear in mind that to check that what he had mentioned to me. And so after I talked to at least at least 8 deep interview with people and many other relevant parties, I found out that in the wake of COVID-19, so in Vietnam, we have more than 1.4 million Vietnamese workers lost their job. At the same time, because of zero COVID in China, those casino industries struggle with labor forces. So that's why they operated to recruit more people from Vietnam, the Philippines, Thailand, Myanmar, or Laos to Cambodia to work as for the gambling. And so most people were tricked to Cambodia, and they were promised to have a good job with high salary, with basic computer skills. And after they crossed the border, their passports were confiscated. Some other were drugged and taken to those casinos. Then they were forced to work days and nights if they could not deliver the target. Next slide, please. So they were forced to work days and nights, 12 to 15 hours a day. And if they could not deliver the target of scam money, they were beaten up like this, tortured, electrocuted, or starved. Many Vietnamese people did try to escape, but they were shot, or if they would not escape successfully, they would be beaten up like this. So this is the victims that I interviewed, and then you can see that this guy, very young, and he was locked into the bed, and he was beaten up with bruises. And on the right picture, this person was shot, and that is the scar that left when he tried to jump from the floor. And in August, 42 workers jumped to a river to escape, and one dead. It's very tragic. And others, like I mentioned, the guy I interviewed of the right picture, even like think about committed suicide because of the harsh working condition, or they didn't want to lure any other people, Vietnamese people, to Cambodia or treat other people anymore. So next slide, please. So this is the illustration that we made, that we want to reach more in raising public awareness. We produce long-form, heavily illustrated stories on our website to for people to have the whole picture, vivid picture of all the way a victim were treated online on Facebook or on website to end it up to a compound like this in Cambodia. And I also hosted several talk shows and also make short videos like short reels for YouTube and Facebook. Next slide, please. So this is the videos that I did with like from the very random advertising on Facebook, and then the person came to meet a broker, and then he tried from a car to border Vietnam and Cambodia, and he worked days and nights. And then he was sorted. This is the satellite that I use Google to relocate the position of that person. And he had to pay the ransom 2,600 to go back to his family. Okay. Yes. So to sum up, I just want to share that I think it's very important to have journalists and rescuers networks in Vietnam, but not only in Vietnam. When we have a strong international network, it did help me to connect the issue in Cambodia to other regions such as Myanmar, Thailand, and Taiwan, to understand that this is not a single country issue. It is a regional criminal network. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Since you mentioned this strong professional networks inside and outside Vietnam, how did you manage to build these networks to enable your reporting on human trafficking?
So I used to work in Vietnam for 2 or 3 years, and then after I go out to work to leave the country to work for the BBC, I still manage to discuss with them the stories, or because like I said, it is in Vietnam we don't have freedom of expression or freedom of press. So there's a lot of story, and there are also a lot of journalists. They have passionate about having freedom, so they share with me the sides that mainstream media didn't mention. So we have that connection together, and that's why we still keep to work on the work that we want to promote. And that's this discussion, we have to keep it, and we have to update with each other what's happening and what you can do, what I can help you, because I'm outside, I can help you on this part, and you inside, you can help me with this part.
And you mentioned that there were also challenges in reaching out to human trafficking victims because of their safety and fear of retribution. Maybe you can share with us some strategies on how you managed to find these sources, these human trafficking victims to talk to?
So like I mentioned that I read a lot of like calling for help, begging for help on Facebook, and then I messaged them in person and I asked them a list of questions because I did a comprehensive research before, so I know exactly what question that I can ask to verify this is the person of victim person or this is just another broker that's or you know a scrambler that want to have my money. And I like I mentioned, people in my colleagues in Vietnam also have a lot of resources and they interview a lot of people, but there are some sites that I cannot mention on their newspaper, on their story. So I also contact with them. And I also mentioned about like I work with white hackers. So they also check that is it people that is a victims or they are brokers or they fake ID that want to trick your money. So that's what that we have a lot of parties and we work together and cross-check and verify it.
Yeah, a global investigative journalism network also helps you connect with journalists in different countries. So definitely, if you're looking for contacts, sources, you can write into us at hello@gijn.org as well. Thank you to Bui for sharing your experience. And now it's time for our third speaker, Nien Pei. Just for security reasons, Nien Pei will not join us on video, but we look forward to hear what she has to share.
So thank you, Eunice, and thank you, Siapati Litna and Dubey, for your insightful discussion. We can see similar structure and patterns of criminal networks and activities across the region, including in Myanmar. So good afternoon, everyone. I suppose everyone here already know the situations, and we all are seeing the reports about organized crimes, including online scandemic, casino cities, money laundering, trafficking, modern slavery, torture, organ harvesting, you name it. Everything happening in the region, particularly in Myanmar. The victims included different nationalities, as Siapati Litna said, Kenyan from Africa, and India, China, and Southeast Asian nations. Those victims are declining into Myanmar. Our focus today is about practical tips for reporters who are going to investigate the transnational organized crime. So rather than sharing the findings from my investigation, I am going to share some context, tips, and suggestions that I hope to contribute my fellows to some extent. Oh, I'm sorry, I am facing some technical problem to move my slide.
No problem. Is it stuck there?
Oh.
Shall we ask Andrea to take over?
That's okay.
We can see the next slide proper.
So Myanmar is located at the junction of South Asia, East Asia, and Southeast Asia, where transboundary organized criminal activities are deeply rooted for decades. Conflict in Myanmar is an epicenter of transnational organized crimes, and this is a major source country of trafficking, drugs, natural resources, arms, human beings, and everything. There are multiple different actors, and these criminal networks use multiple layers of proxy. Following COVID-19 military coup, brutal operation, and growing resistance against the military regime across the country, transnational organized criminal gangs are exploiting and taking advantage of conflicts, poverty, governance vacuums, lawlessness, and the criminal facilitation by the Myanmar military. With international sanctions and blacklists imposed on Myanmar junta, the military integrated more into the criminal markets and embraced the organized crime in the country. What we are seeing is the conflict-driven economies. There are criminal networks involved by Myanmar military, and it is proxy local militias and border guard forces. Illicit economy has long been a major source of power for Myanmar military. There are hundreds of new casino opening in Yangon and Mandalay. Those casino opening ceremonies were attended by Chinese and Myanmar military men. So we can look at some cases here. in Myanmar-China border on August 2022, an illegal online fraud company in Mingala Muse was seized by the authorities. Mingala Muse is located in cross-border economic cooperation zone, which is part of China-Myanmar economic corridor and the China Belt and Road initiatives. That online fraud company was joint venture by Myanmar military commander and Chinese businessmen. So it was reported that the arrest was done by the request of the China. So in one region along China-Myanmar border, the UWSA arrested dozens of people doing online scam. And as we all see now, Thailand is launching a series of operations arresting Chinese triads in several provinces. UNODC reported that there are hundreds of casinos and hundreds of special economic zones across the Mekong, where there are also growing risks of transnational organized crime. But the latest expansion, even inside Myanmar alone, there are over hundreds of casino and criminal businesses, and they keep separating day by day. For Myanmar, a lot of major activities known to be along the Salween River, Mekong River, and Taoyin River, bordering China, Laos, and Thailand. But the criminal gangs are already taking their space from borderlands to central Myanmar major cities, including Yangon and Mandalay. Now we can see the recruitment activities. Recruiting people every single day. There are hundreds of vacancy announcements every day in Myanmar. Many new companies, and especially the Chinese companies, opening every day. Their targeted recruits is age between 18 and 30 or 18 and 35. Their announcement always said it is for online customer service in northern and northeastern Myanmar. It is known as GIJN, which means working for online scam. Their job is to fake, persuade, and decoy new people, especially foreigners, into the criminal markets. The incentive for young people who are looking for employment is attractive salary, like the two-way set, whatever in Cambodia. Their incentives is high salary, which is higher amount compared to other local works during this time of inflation, higher price of commodities, and high employment in Myanmar. So in Myanmar, they use Facebook, Telegram, Viber, and WeChat as well. They recruit all levels, all three levels of people: people with no skill, people with language skill or computer skill. They prefer Chinese speaking and English speaking and people, and they also recruit professionals, including medical doctors, to work in their criminal cities. And they recruit through three channels: through office interviews and MOU agents that they do in Yangon office and Mandalay office, and through online, and through smuggling on the ground. So this is the map of the infamous KK Park. It is located in Palu, opposite of Megu village in southern Sri Lanka. It is in Myawaddy, Mae South, and Myanmar, Thailand border. This criminal compound is located opposite of Thai military base. Thousands of people stuck in this compound, including those people trafficked from Africa. There is only a small Taoyin River in between this compound and the military base. A lot of organized crime activities are happening there, according to several reports, including online scam, casino cities, money laundering, and trafficking, modern slavery, torture, organ harvesting, and everything happening here. As I said before, the victims included the different nationalities across the Indo-Pacific region. So we can also look at the expansion of these criminal networks. They are known criminal hubs such as Myanmar in GIJN state, bordering Thailand, Muse, Laos, Tachile, Myla, Pansan, and so on in Shan state, bordering China and Laos. But as I said before, organized crime networks are expanding to central Myanmar areas, particularly in major cities such as Yangon and Mandalay. There are now hundreds of casinos in major cities as well, particularly in Mandalay. Whenever those new casinos are opened, and along with the Chinese businessmen, Myanmar military commanders are attending the ceremony. So they are opening office in Yangon and Mandalay. They started running in several townships in Yangon region and also in several townships in Mandalay region as well. These offices ran two operations of organized crime. One is online scam, multiple kinds of gambling, human and drug trafficking, money laundering, and so on. Another one is they gather people from across central Myanmar to Yangon or to Mandalay, and then they smuggle them to border criminal hub, especially to Myanmar, Tachile, Myla, and Laos. So I would like to talk about the challenges briefly. The first one is security, safety for both interviewers and interviewees when we do this kind of issues. And there are also multiple actors involving in these networks, from street gangs to organized crime syndicate to local stakeholder to state actors. There are also food soldiers and informal everywhere. So my suggestion is the first one is the protection of the identity of sources and insider. We must have solid and trusted local sources, as Saya Bhattacharya said, and that we need mapping of the networks and the collaboration and networks inside. Oh, sorry. Collaboration and networks inside Myanmar and across the border, and we need to meet multiple different actors as many as possible and apply investigative reporting techniques, including desk research and field research, interview primary sources and evidence as usual. And the last one is, as my last point, I would like to talk about actors. And the first one is we need to always consider the historical and political context and different interests among the actors. And there are actors from inside Myanmar and also cross-border, cross-boundary actors. We are seeing several reports about Chinese trials and all. We do not have much time now, so today I would like to briefly talk about the local actors, both state actors and non-state actors. There are multiple different actors and multiple layers of proxy. So the first one is Myanmar military. Myanmar people no longer accept the Myanmar military as a state actor, but it is stay in the position of state actor from the international perspective. But in the state actor, the state actor is a criminal enterprise, which is also a mafia state and kleptocracy. Multiple different actors in Myanmar involving in transitional criminal activities. Nevertheless, Myanmar military has been the largest armed group in Myanmar, complicit in transnational organized crimes for decades. The military directly involved as well as indirectly facilitate local militias, PDUSIT, Border Guard Force, BGF, in doing illicit economies. Militias and BGS had permission from the military to carry out such businesses. Myanmar military used the transnational organized crimes for their financial benefits, as well as for using as its proxy to counter ethnic revolutionary organizations in their respected area. So, Border Guard Force, and they are under the control of and connected to Myanmar military and militias. In Burmese, we call it PDUSIT. Not all of them, but many of the militias are under the control of Myanmar military. Some members of the Sajai militias in Myanmar are Chinese citizens from China. They are hired by paying some amount of salary. We need to always look at the big businesses and proxies activities as well. They might have image as legitimate enterprise, but things are not every time. Oh, shit. So the last one is ethnic armed organizations in Myanmar. When we say militias, it is different from ethnic armed organization. The EOs are different from BGS and militia. The EOs are politically motivated and fighting for equality and self-determination. They are not under the control of Myanmar military. They are non-state actors, but they are state actors in their sovereignty and rights perspective. So these actors are different but from times to times interconnected and overlapping in many areas. It is not black and white situation. In some cases, different actors and different things are happening in the same area. We have to always consider the historical and political context and different interests among the actors when every time we covered about Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nien Nien.
Andrea, could you please stop my screen? My computer has some technical error. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that great overview of what's happening in Myanmar, the different actors, players, and the different sorts of crime that's happening. As to just now mentioned, that there's some type of reporting that you cannot do as a journalist within the country itself, but it can be exposed by reporters outside of the country. So in your experience reporting within your own country, is going undercover necessary to keep safe? For example, like covering casinos in the region, or can the information be found through other ways?
Yeah, we need to do undercover in this kind of cases because and as Sayabati Lieutenant mentioned before, there are different actors and food soldiers and so when we go into those criminal area, not the criminal area, the area that criminal networks are and stay in. So when we go inside those kind of area, we may have the sources and people and organizations that we have already know, but we don't know for sure if they are connected to those kind of works to some extent or more or less. So we need to be careful always. So.
Okay, you mentioned so many actors, right? The military, the law enforcement officials. Sometimes they're complicit and they collude with these organized crime syndicates. So investigating these links obviously can be particularly risky. But do you have any advice or any strategies journalists can use to investigate this safely, or no?
Yeah, the thing is that we need to have strong and reliable, solid sources and insider. And another one is the safety concern.
And maybe just to sum up this part, do you have any advice on protecting the identity of your solid sources? Because it could also affect their job as well.
Yeah, that is why, as I said earlier, the safety and security concern is the first thing that we need to consider in covering this kind of issue. Security for both interviewers and interviewees, and when we mean security, it includes digital security and physical security, and also emotional security as well.
Thank you for that answer. For the audience, if you have any, thank you for the questions that have come in. If you have any questions, please keep them coming. Before we go to the audience questions, Bertil, I just want to come back to you. Do you have any final thoughts to wrap up this presentation?
Yes, I would like to say a few things, actually. I was very glad that you mentioned Shwekoko and Palu, because this is a typical example how the networks are connected across the region. Because I mentioned the name of a very famous gangster from Macau, was actually the leader of the 14K trial there for many years before he was put in prison. And it was released, made a deal with the Chinese government, and he is back in business again. He started off in Cambodia, in Sihanoukville casinos. Then he moved to Myanmar, especially Palu, and first Shwekoko, later on Palu. And the only advice I could give here is that I actually been to Shwekkoko. And it's a little bit difficult to be this undercover if you look like I do, in an area like in a place like that. But I was smuggled in a car. And what I got out of that, and it is also quite important, is that I got a feel for the place. I got some visuals. I could only look through it through the car window, but it was in many ways enough. And then I discovered something there which was quite unique. Chinese security firms. There were people with guns who were not from that area at all. But China now has, like the United States, Blackwater, armed security firms, and they are active in this region as well. But I must say the information, of course, I got from sources on the Thai side of the border, people who knew what was going on inside there, trusted sources, people I know for a long time. But as I said, I got a feel for the place, and above all, I could say to people, yes, look, I've been there, I've been to Shwekkoko, So it increased my credibility, even if I didn't get that much factual information from that visit. But I think that's the way we journalists have to work. It is quite important to try to be on the spot as much as possible, to the extent you can, without exposing yourself to too many dangers and so on. And then depend on, as everybody has been saying so far, the best sources are always local people. They can be NGO workers, or they can be local journalists and so on. I trust them much more than I try local government officials. It may be good to talk to government officials too, but it's only to get their point of view so you can put in the story and make the whole thing a little bit more objective, if you like that term. But by and large, it's very important to be on the spot and to do a lot of legwork. That is when you find out what's going on in these places. But be careful, because it's not without risk at all.
Yes, definitely safety and security is one important concern among journalists, and we do have safety and security resources on GIJN.org. Our resource center, my colleague will put the resource center links in the chat. Now, thank you for the questions from the audience. We're gonna take some of them. First one for Bertil. The borders themselves have become a violent force because the gangs and the criminal organizations know that by crossing between borders, they easily pass the legal constraints of different governments. So the bureaucracy in some way becomes an element that encourages crimes across borders. What do you think about the impact of bureaucracy in this issue?
Well, if you talk about local bureaucracies, customs, police, and that sort of thing, it's basically just corruption, nothing else. And you can slip across back and forth of these borders, and the law doesn't really apply at all. I mean, if you're talking about the Myanmar side of the China border or across the border in Yunnan, it's pretty much up to local lords of various kinds to decide what is happening there. But every now and then, of course, the central authorities get more get interested in what's happening there, and that is what Yin said. This example of the Chinese put pressure on the Myanmar, I think, to extradite some criminals. That is a very rare thing. It doesn't happen that often. But as I said, if you look at the local level, it's usually corruption. If you go a little bit higher up, then you talk about collusion. It can be that they actually turn a blind eye to these activities because the gangs or the criminals are useful for other purposes. And in exchange for that, they get protection for their illegal activities.
I know we talked a bit about the levels, the layers of actors in this organized crime, but is there a way journalists can follow the trail of local gangs to the mastermind, the big syndicates? Is there safe ways to do so?
No. There's no safe way to do it, but you can try. But when you can do these investigations, you keep the information. But then when you get really to the top, you have to be very, very careful. It's not fun to be sued by these guys. And they tend to do that if they think they're under attack. And good people, they don't have to take things to court. They can defend themselves anyway. Only bad people sue journalists for defamation and libel. But then it is very difficult, even if you win in the end, it's a very long and difficult process you have to go through. It is draining, and it's really hard. I mean, I've been through it myself, and it wasn't fun at all. Also for 2 years before I eventually got off. So it is a good, apart from the advice that you have from the GIJN, if you have a trusted lawyer, it can be very good to talk to that lawyer as well, who will then give you some legal advice. Sometimes it's actually how you phrase it in the article. If you say this guy is involved in this and that, you can say he's allegedly blah blah blah, and then add a couple of qualifiers. But as I said, it's a very tricky business, and there's really no safe way of writing about the very top without getting into trouble.
Thank you, Bertil. The next question, I think it's for Nien Nien. You mentioned KK Park. Are there any ways to investigate who actually owns the compound? Any advice on that? Nien Nien? Bertil, you can also jump in if you have any ideas.
Which park are we talking about here?
I think it was called KK.
And where is it located?
Hang on, this place that Nien Nien was showing, that huge place where there's organ trafficking and Nien Nien.
Well, in general terms, you can say that it is very difficult to prove anything here without having solid witnesses. It's very difficult to back up any kind of accusation without, some kind of statements or reports from a credible agency. But again, it underlines the whole problem here that you have to be very careful with facts here. It's very easy to write something which everybody knows is true. But when it comes to legal matters, it's a different story. And if you mention a company like that specifically, then you're in trouble. It's better to write around it than to write about it. But to write about the phenomenon, the business, rather than sort of pinpointing a specific actor in that criminal activity.
I see. So what you're suggesting is expose the system and the process instead of pointing fingers without evidence, obviously. Thank you for that, Bertil. The next question would be, I guess this can be taken by two as well. What would be your advice in terms of how to use public records and public domain information in order to report about these criminal activities in the Golden Triangle?
For example, I saw a lot of videos that victims were picked up and electrocuted in Cambodia compounds on Facebook, but we have to verify it. So the advice that you have to verify it, and when you cannot use it. You can use another way by approaching the real victims and then ask them if they have those resources, because there are thousands of people like that, and definitely you can find some sources like that. So I did have the footage and the photos that I showed you guys on the slides that people were beaten up and electrocuted. So my advice that if you cannot verify, you definitely cannot use it, because sometimes it is real footage. You can check by technical and read some technical statistics, but it may be out of date already or years ago. So you have to be very careful when using it. And for the BBC, it's very restricted. So we also have the problem with copyrights. So I just use what source that I have given the copyrights, and I can verify.
Thank you. We do have tip sheets on verification of open sources in GIJN.org, which we will send to everyone in an email tomorrow. The next question is, because you mentioned just now, after COVID-19, the criminals have kind of changed their methods of working. So has the strategy for journalists investigating this human trafficking crimes and other crimes as well changed since COVID? Has it become all more digital? What do we have to do now?
Like I said, I myself cannot have the chance to talk face-to-face to victims. So I think it's also a big change to me to talk to victims via phone. You cannot know what their reaction, what they face, gestures which help you to verify this person say you the truth or not. But like I mentioned, we can ask again and again the questions and ask them to describe the very details in very detailed way. So that's why I can have the very detailed route that the people were lured to from Vietnam to Cambodia, in what way, how they were lured to it, and which way that they were taken on a car, and then at the border they were taken by another motorbike. So and what is the scene, and I asked the same questions to many victims, and they describe the same thing. So then I can know that, oh, they did traffic people on the same route from Vietnam, particularly from Ho Chi Minh City to Tây Ninh, which is the province near the border with Cambodia, and to Ba Phat City. So I think that is also the way. And I also mentioned about the tools you can use by Google and etc. to locate exactly the location, and you can have the satellite map to see, oh, this is exactly the building that the victim described. Yes.
You mentioned tools. There was a question asking about which tool you use to create the animation.
Oh, we use Adobe Animation, but it is not my work. It is in my company we have a visual journalism team, and we work with them. So we brief them what exactly, and I draw it myself very badly, and then I describe to my colleagues, and then he was the one to draw all the things, and I put it into videos myself.
Okay, thank you. Nhan Nhan, you're welcome to join in whenever you can. The next question is, what is needed to strengthen journalists' capacity to investigate organized crime in the region? I mean, we mentioned cross-border networks and communication and collaboration between journalists in different countries. Are there any other ideas? What do we need to help journalists investigate this? Bertil?
Is that to anybody or?
Bertil, let's start with you. Two can think in the meantime.
Well, one problem actually in this digital age is that there are very few wealthy magazines left, or very few wealthy newspapers left. Everything is on websites, and most of them have very limited resources. As I mentioned before, I used to work for the Far East Economic Review for 20 years. They send me to China, they send me here and there, picked up my expenses. These days, that is impossible, cannot do it. So the question is, how can you investigate a journalism and actually also manage to, make a living? That is not easy. It's becoming increasingly difficult because of the change that media has been going through over the past decade or so. But the important thing is that I think is to collaborate with a network like yours and get help and support from you, and they would help local journalists a lot in their work as well. Because very often they're sitting there isolated with very limited resources. And like Tu also said here, there are a lot of very knowledgeable journalists inside Vietnam, for instance, but they can't write anything because there's no freedom of press, there's no press freedom, no freedom of expression. So then they collaborate with journalists outside the country. I mean, this is how I covered Myanmar for almost 2 decades. I was banned from the country. I couldn't go. But I had very solid sources inside the country. People who wanted information to get out, and I knew that what information they gave to me was credible because I knew them personally, and I knew that they were people I could trust. So that is one way of doing it. But again, this kind of very long investigative projects are very difficult to carry out without any support from a foundation or something like that. And there are certain sources for that. And maybe you could help out with that, with a list of foundations which are willing to support investigative journalism, because it takes time and it costs a lot of money sometimes. You have to travel. You have to, be away from home for weeks sometimes. And you have to take certain measures to protect yourself and your friends.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, we are working together with Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime for this project, this webinar, this guide. So definitely, if journalists in the region need resources or help, advice, reach out to us, reach out to GTalk, and we're here to help. To anything else that journalists need from, yeah.
I think I did mention about a network, and like people like me or people working for in those countries like Myanmar, China, Bangladesh, we all face the same problem of the authoritarianism government. And sometimes we are put on a blacklist, like what you just mentioned. And some of us also travel bans that we can, even we hold a Vietnamese passport, we cannot enter the country to work as journalists. So I think that it's very important to build a network, like I mentioned, and you have to nourish that network. And you have to, and after you have the information, you protect them definitely, but you have to use it, make it out of it, because maybe they risk their security, or maybe they risk their resources to give you information or list. So you have to make out the best of it. You have to write about it. You cannot keep silent about it, and you can do more like animation to protect the identity of the person that you interview, or you can do more videos, all the ways to let the story reach out to as many as people as possible. Yeah.
Thank you. There was a question about how to treat human trafficking victims. GIJN also has resources on this, which we will email all participants tomorrow in an email. But we are quite running out of time. So there's just one last question. We talked about Golden Triangle today, and there's so many things going on in terms of trafficking. There's humans trafficking, wildlife trafficking, drugs. There's illegal in the guide as well. It's mentioned that there's illegal mining, illegal logging, looting of antiquities, production of weapons. So there's so much to dig in. Where can journalists start after this webinar? After this webinar ends, where do they start? Bertil?
I think you start by reading our guide.
Which Holly will put in the chat. Yes.
Because they gives an overview of all these different activities and how to investigate. But it's not just the order text, it's a lot of hyperlinks there to a variety of sources to back up what is actually in the guide. But you're right. So in the beginning, the Golden Triangle, there was a kind of opium wonderland, really. There was only opium and drugs. Now it's everything. I mean, every crime imaginable is kind of centered there. And if you take, wildlife trafficking, for instance, that is not exactly new, but I mean, it's something that come over the past, I would say, 10, 15 years, 20 years at the most. Minerals, rare earth minerals, there's even more recent. And that is not actually really illegal. It's somewhere in the gray zone between what is illegal and what is not. Because the trade is being carried out from areas not controlled by any central government, but imported legally to China and then used in the computer industry there. So again, we're dealing with not only with black and white, also with the gray area here in between.
Okay. Thu, do you want to also weigh in before we end?
I think that Bertil have covered all the things that I want to mention.
Okay, so unfortunately we are running out of time, and before we close, I would like to thank our GIJN team behind the scenes today and our audience for your patience and for listening to this. Thanks also to the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, GTalk, for its support of this project. And most of all, a very big thank you to our guest speakers today, to Bertil and Nyen Nyen. Finally, be sure to watch our Twitter feed at GIJN and website gijn.org for details on future events, our resources, tip sheets. Next week, we also have a related webinar on investigating organized crime in sub-Saharan Africa. You're invited to join as well. We will send you all the link in an email. And once again, thank you all and goodbye.